Hendrik invited me for this conference, and he wanted me to give an overview of prevalence of use in a recreational way of psychedelics or some psychedelic substances. So I did that. It's not the most interesting part, but we have to do it just to give you an overview of what's going on when, what kind of people use, not what, but what kind of substances are being used. But since I work at the Trimbos-Institute and my main field of work is drug checking for drug users, I thought it would be nice to also combine this topic with another one, namely what the content of what people buy when they buy some substances, some psychedelics. So I will focus then on ketamine, on 2CB, and also on LSD. But first, the other stuff. When I prepared this presentation, I was really surprised to see that there is not a lot actually available when it comes to prevalence of use of psychedelics. I looked into the World Drug Report, which comes out every year. It's by UNODC. The European Drug Report is from Europe, obviously from the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction. Then I looked at the Global Drug Survey, which is actually more interesting, and I have one slide on national data from the Netherlands, but I might skip that because of the time limit. First, as I already mentioned, global estimates, they are lacking. There's very little literature on what kind of people or what drugs are actually being used. You do not know that probably, but every country has to report to the UNODC, the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime, on a yearly basis, a very extensive questionnaire regarding the use of all kinds of substances. And what they do is that they also report hallucinogens, but they never actually mention what kind of hallucinogens. So basically the data are very unreliable. Although they mention in this report sorry, that the use of hallucinogens is on the increase, is increasing a bit, but it's very much limited if you compare it to use of, for instance, cannabis or ecstasy. So there is use in the world, but not so much as others. And then they conclude this chapter with saying that, however, recent or current use of hallucinogens in general is quite low in most countries, and there's limited recent scientific literature on the epidemiology and patterns of such use. So basically, on a global level, we know not so much, if nothing at all. There is some general trends. There are some general trends you could see, but it's very general, stating that that LSD is more common in North and South America, in Western and Central Europe, and also in Australia. And it may be on the increase in Central and South America. Maybe our friend from Argentina can.
It's all.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. In South America, it's also reported that N-bombs are being sold as LSD. So LSD is actually missold as some kind of N-bombs, maybe also the 25C and the 25I. Well, as you all know, in North America, the prevalence of LSD is relatively high. It's around 1%, which is quite high in these terms, and it's even also increasing. And then ketamine is on the increase. Well, it's common actually in South and East Asia, and it's also in the increase in some European countries, notably the Netherlands, but especially the UK. Well, not the UK, but England and Wales. I will come back to that in a minute. So that's on a global level, very general, and even less data are known from Europe. The European Drug Report has only a very small paragraph talking about hallucinogens or psychedelics or whatever they call it. And they have some very simple data on ketamine, LSD, and hallucinogenic mushrooms, magic mushrooms. Well, recreational use of ketamine has been reported over 2 decades and probably even longer in a number of EU member states. National estimates, if available, are usually very, very low. But last year, prevalence among young adults, so the age of 16 to 34, we see that Denmark is a bit higher, and 1.7% for the UK is quite high. When it comes to LSD or hallucinogenic mushrooms, Again, the overall prevalence is very low. Also among 15 to 34 years of age. And there's a few exceptions. Finland, for one reason, Finland, both mushrooms and LSD seem to be used in that country more than elsewhere. And the Netherlands, when it comes to mushrooms, or sclerotia as we call it nowadays, truffles, is also quite high. And the Norwegians, they have a bit, they also like some LSD more than other psychedelics. This is obviously quite difficult to see, but here you can see that young people, it's obvious actually, but young people, when people take LSD, young adults take this more than people in the general population. It makes sense. This is a slide actually from the World Drug Report stating that in the UK, in England and in Wales, since 2016, it's actually interesting, the use of ketamine has increased largely, and this may have been, the interesting thing is that in 2016, ketamine was reclassified from class C to class B, but nevertheless, the use of this, of ketamine largely increased. Interesting. So, what else? More interesting, I thought, was the Global Drug Survey, which is held every year. It's global, so it's covering not the whole world, but or all countries, but around 30, I think. It's an online questionnaire. It's to be filled out by, well, by people who want to do that, but the focus is on young adults. They are the ones who tend to fill out or fill in these questionnaires. They're under 25 years of age. They're active clubbers, so they go out frequently into the nightlife scene. And this year actually, over 120,000 responses were counted. Since it's 60% is young adults, it's not really representative, but it's good to have additional information and to compare with other data. What they did here was, what interesting here was that around 30 countries participated, and I don't really know why, but German respondents, they really liked to fill out this questionnaire, so it's almost a quarter or more. And yeah, oh, really?
One of the biggest films, the Zeitung.
Ah.
That is filling out the story.
Okay. Because it's remarkable, because if you see number 2, it's United States, it's a third. Sorry?
Is it translated to Spanish?
Yes, it's in many languages. It's just online. And I got permission to show you some of these slides. They're horrible because it's just print screens, but they sit on that data. You have to pay actually for the report, and I didn't want to do that. And I was hoping Adam gave me the stuff, but he didn't. So I was allowed to use this, but it's better than nothing. This is impossible. For this reason, it's impossible to see what I'm trying to say here. When it comes to the large group of psychedelics, you can see that, well, the most used drug in this case is obviously cannabis, and then probably MDMA and amphetamine and stuff. On the 5th place, there's actually already LSD. This is ever used, so it's lifetime prevalence. 5th place is LSD, and then mushrooms, magic mushrooms, are 7th or something like that. And then here in the middle, you have a large group of 2CB, DMT, kratom, and truffles, and also 1P LSD, a novel psychoactive substance which mimics the effect of LSD, but the prevalence of those drugs is much lower. Looking at LSD, a quarter of all the respondents, no, a third actually said they have ever used LSD. So in this group, 25 or younger, active clubbers, a third of them actually used LSD at least once in their life. And half of this group did it last year. This is the mean, and it's not really new information, but when people use LSD, they don't do that on a day-to-day basis. You would not survive, but they do it, the mean is 3 times a year. What's this? Oh yeah, this is the price. It's interesting. I will get to that later as well. You see that there are huge differences in prices. In New Zealand, which makes sense because it's so far away from where the production probably takes place, it costs almost 40 euros for one tab, for one blotter, whereas the average is, I think, around 20. And in my country, in the Netherlands, it's only 10, and our own data show that's even cheaper than 10 euros. Magic mushrooms, even more people actually have ever tried mushrooms than LSD, a bit more. And here we have the same mean. So, you know, as you all know, psychedelics are not repeatedly used, so it's just every now and then, quite often well prepared. The value for money is actually quite interesting. So they ask, what do you think about the substance that you have actually taken? And then you can see that for, now I have to look at my glasses again, is LSD, but also ketamine and mushrooms. They are, people think that the quality of the substance that they have used is really high. They get value for money, whereas for cocaine or for other substances it's much less. Interesting stuff. I'll get back to that later as well. Also interesting, and this is a bit in contrast with both the World Drug Report and the European Drug Report, is that if people use MPS, they predominantly like to use MPS that mimic the effects of psychedelics. So they are really looking for psychedelic drugs. Whereas the World Drug Report and also the European Drug Report says that, you know, the prevalence is really low. This is just one slide from the Netherlands. This is also among the same target group, so people who frequently go out. It was done in 2016, and then you can see exactly the average, as I already presented, is that 17% ever used ketamine. And to a much lesser extent LSD and other psychedelics. So in conclusion, data are very scarce. The recreational use of hallucinogenic and psychedelics is overall very low globally and in the EU compared to cannabis and cocaine and ecstasy and speed and all that stuff. But that ketamine and also LSD may be on the rise. MPS, new drugs, designer drugs, especially the psychedelic ones, the use is still very low, but you can see in specific subsections, like those who frequently go out, it's much higher. Then the more interesting part is that some data from our drug checking services, I would like to show you some data on the purity, adulterations, the prices of the substances that are submitted to our services. And if time remains also, I could make a comparison between those drugs bought online and offline, because one of the reasons people go to the internet to buy drugs is that they think the quality is better. DIMS is Drugs Information Monitoring System, so it's our drug checking service network in the Netherlands, 33 locations. We coordinate that at the Trimbos-Institute, and we are fully funded by the Ministry of Health at national level. At local level, the local authorities, they pay for this work. It's completely legal nowadays, or nowadays for 25 years already. And it's important for you to know that it's office-based, so it's not in festivals that we test. We did that previously, but not any longer since 2002. It was forbidden, and since it's office-based, but this allows us to get really reliable results from analysis. So, happy to say that we are the oldest still alive, the oldest drug checking service is still alive. Larissa Meyer and her colleagues did a global review, and we are there on top. But nowadays there's many more services in the world, especially in Europe, but also abroad. But it's still not nowhere enough. These were the samples submitted in 2018. So we had around 12,500 samples from over 13,000 people. So on a weekly basis, that's really a lot. I think it's well, around 250. We are fully occupied with drug checking every day of the week. And what we see basically is ecstasy, 62%, and to a much lesser extent, cocaine and speed. And there you see 2CB. If you can call that a hallucinogenic, it's 2CB. and 3% ketamine, and also 2% of our samples is related to LSD. Those three I will just now shortly mention when it comes to purity and so on. First, ketamine. In 2017, it costed around 25 euro. We know this because we ask people a lot of questions when they submit a sample. One of them is where did you buy it, but also how much did you pay for it? And this is just an average, so it's not a median, it's an average. 25.10, but a year later it was dropped, so last year it dropped to 23.90, something like that. In 2017, 86% of all the samples, all the ketamine samples contained actually ketamine, and these were the adulterances, one of which was the chlorpheniramine. The purity in 2017 was 75, and this is for 2018. Whoa, 5 minutes, okay. The purity went up, no, not the purity, but the samples containing ketamine went up to 91%, so it's a very stable market. And some other adulterants were mentioned in that. Since I have 5 minutes left, I will skip 2CB. The interesting thing of 2CB is that it was also a very stable market, but now in the first half of 2019, we saw that the number of samples containing 2CB dropped from over 90 to 75, so something is really going on in that market with the production. LSD, I would like to show you, it's, we saw from the Global Drug Survey that the mean was 10 euros. Here we have in 2017 7.3 euros per blotter, but in 2018 it dropped to 6.5. Then when it comes to the average dose, it's more or less, it was 81 micrograms in 2017. And here in 2018, it increased to 86, and this is a very, it varies a lot. But as with the other substances, there's not so much of adulterations in LSD. It's probably very difficult to adulterate. Once you have the blotter, you have the blotter, and so there's nothing much you can do with that. Conclusions here, that the LSD, ketamine, and 2CB are far less adulterated compared to all the other substances that we see on a daily basis or a weekly basis, with the exception probably of MDMA, which is also very pure ecstasy, even more pure. And for 2CB, it's changing. This is very shortly, I would like to draw your attention. This is also almost finished. This was a published study in addiction 2 years ago, or 3 years ago already. We compared the prices of and the adulteration and the purity of drugs bought online versus offline. We didn't see much differences when it came to the purity. Only 4 were statistically significant. The interesting, most 3 ecstasy, 4FA, which is an MPS, and 2CB were more pure online, but very interesting, but out of the scope of this conference, is that MDMA powders were more adulterated online. So the purity of MDMA was higher when you buy it online, offline, sorry. And then adulterations. Here you can see that actually what I just mentioned, you see the LSD on the red, and it's either, we saw that both offline and online, it either contains LSD or it doesn't, but there's not so much adulteration when it comes to LSD. The prices it was interesting because we expected the prices to be lower than offline. No, the prices would be lower online than offline, but for the Netherlands, the opposite was true. In 6 out of 10 substances, the prices were higher, and cocaine, you can see 22% higher than if you buy it just in the street or with friends. For LSD, there was not so much a difference, but it's interesting. So, conclusion of that study, very, very shortly, is that all over purity and adulteration of online and online purchased substances do not really vary a lot. LSD is usually not adulterated, it's either in the sample or not, and the prices are on online higher, but that may be due to the specific of the Dutch drugs markets, where drugs are generally available largely good quality and also for a good price, so to speak, offline, and so therefore Dutch drug users don't feel the need as much as they do maybe in other countries to go online and buy their drugs. And this is perfectly in time. The end of my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Daan.
Thank you.
Maud.
Do you think that just by existing and doing these drug checkings that you're affecting the market? If you look over the since what, 75 or 80?
No, 92.
No, 90, the 90s. Do you think you affected the market and that's why you have higher purity, or do you think it's because of other things?
I'd like to say that we influence the market, but the reality is no, because although we have 12,500 samples, it's still just 12,500, because the majority of drugs we don't see. The majority of the users, they don't frequently visit our drug checking services. However, in an indirect way, we probably influence the market because we do sometimes a red alert, so we warn for extra dangerous drugs. We do that really very high profile on the radio and TV and everything. We warn for instance, the pink Superman tablet some years ago. Nobody took that tablet, because why would you want to take a drug, a tablet that would actually kill you because it had a high amount of PMMA in it and no MDMA. And secondary also, if we find through our services that, for instance, online retrieved substances contain something completely different or even more toxic or more lethal substances, we directly approach the vendor and we say, well, please take the stock off the market, inform the ones who you've already sold it to that the substance contains something completely different. And if you don't do that, we will just talk to the health inspector and then we'll see what they do. And in the Netherlands, we are quite well known, so they tend to listen quite well. And we're now in a discussion because also last week we had some samples bought on the darknet from an unknown vendor, probably, I think he was actually from Argentina or something. They probably don't know DIMS, so it has a different dynamic. So the impact of our work, what?
What were they selling?
I think they were selling heroin for ketamine.
There is no heroin, I think.
No, but so then the impact is lower than in our country. So we influence the market in a indirect way.
I have actually two good questions. One is, I got a bit confused because at some point you talk about the price of, for example, the LSD, but then there is a question of whether it's LSD really or not. For example, at some point there was you showed a plot in which LSD appeared to be very cheap in Argentina. The reason is that actually it's not LSD, is of all the things that fit into a blotter and are psychoactive, most of them, or all of them are basically cheaper than LSD.
Yeah.
So you don't know the identity, how can you
No.
be confident of the price?
It's true. Yeah.
Other very good thing you asked at some point, where do people get the drugs from? In the sense that, for example, certain drugs that you can grow your mushrooms or you can buy them, or the EMD you can buy the crystals or you can do the extraction process yourself. So you co-engage where people, the person getting the drug, decides just buying those are the decisions.
The last question, we don't really, so we do not test for drug dealers, so people have to be consumers, but sometimes, it slips through your fingers, you never know. So it's this aspect, they're consumers of drugs. They may grow their own stuff, but we don't check for mushroom because it's a very complicated technique to do so. So people buy it and then they have it analyzed before they use it. The first part was about a global drug survey. Yes, I don't know how they have done that, so they're just, one of the questions is how much did you pay for a sample or a drug sold as LSD? This is the only thing. So you never know what's inside, it could be anything else. Okay.
Yep. Time for one more question?
There's a lot of myths about LSD, so I'm interested in if you have a blotted paper with, let's say, 9 tabs on it. Some people say that even on the different tabs, the concentrations may vary. Did you test that? Is that true or not?
It's true. This is why for LSD we have a different analysis than for other drugs. We ask people, so you have to bear in mind it's not cheap, LSD, it's also not very expensive in the Netherlands, but it's not cheap. We ask people to send in 2 blotters. So one, we do an analysis our own, we have the specific technique, and the other one we send to the laboratory, but it's a very expensive procedure. You know, it costs us around 150 euros per blotter in the laboratory. For Ecstasy, for instance, it's only 50, or only 50, it's 50 euros, so it's much more expensive, and so you have a different technique. And yes, it's true, we have seen that within one blotter, the active compounds can change a lot, as it does with all the other drugs, actually. Mm-hmm.
How much is a lot? Are we talking about plus minus 5 micrograms, or are we talking?
I think more. I think, yeah. Well, I don't know it by heart, but I think it's more than 5 micrograms. So it's substantial, I would say. Yes.
Do you know how strong was the strongest one, the blotter?
I don't know. The average is usually around 80 to 85, and I think we have seen one, but I'm not sure. So don't punish me if it's not. If I'm wrong. I think it was around 190 micrograms. So there's a lot of variety in these blotters. And the thing is actually also, we see, you know, I didn't present it here, but we see that when people buy drugs online, they have a tendency to buy LSD more than they do offline. It's increasing. And one of the reasons probably is because, you know, some people, they look for a specific type of LSD, and it's not common that a dealer in the street or that's around anyway. So now with LSD, these bottles can come from anywhere in the world, and this is one of the reasons also why people turn to the internet to buy drugs, especially LSD.
Just a quick technical one. So what is the difference between what people tell you how much is on the blotter and what you actually find out? So if someone tells you I have 200 micrograms and you test, is there a big difference between those, or do they usually match?
They don't tell because they don't know. You know, the only thing that they would know the content is the online vendor or the dealer.
Yeah.
But we did not do that for dealers, for street dealers, so because they're usually telling all kinds of things that, you know, we don't do that. We just look at the facts, and the facts in this case is just a laboratory analysis.
Very last question.
You ask, or maybe the scientists of this, not only what people consumed and what we were sold as, for example, stuff as how long the trip lasts, it has like metallic taste, and several other variables that could be actually helpful to know if it was LSD or some more stuff. And you know, and with experience itself, even if not direct proof that it's not LSD, it didn't like direct proof that there was no LSD because LSD has it.
I don't understand the question, sorry.
There is a DOB, for example,
yes.
That experience will be way longer.
Yes.
So if you ask that, for example,
yeah.
You take the basic of the the information can help you identify directly.
It's true, but
they do.
They do. They share a lot of information with us. We ask them for a lot of information because our main task is to monitor the market and illicit drugs. So in this case, a person, we also ask, did you already use it or not? If not, or if you have used it, what were the effects? And this is, for instance, if people think they bought LSD and they took DOB or DOC and they have a very strong experience, then it's interesting for us to focus on that. So we put special attention to this sample, and then usually it comes something like one of these MPSs be present in these samples. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daan.